Welcome to another episode of the Emerging Markets Entrepreneur. And here we go again with Sidwahi, my co-host. And today, a very special guest, Lillian Barnard. She is the Managing Director of Microsoft. Lillian, welcome to the show. And please introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you for having me, Alexandra and Sid, and really glad to be with you this afternoon. Glad to be here with you this afternoon. Lillian Barnard, and I am Managing Director for Microsoft South Africa, and almost going for 2 years in the role, been with the company for years, been in the ICT industry, almost now close to 25 years. So happy and looking forward to our conversation.
Wow, that's amazing. That's an absolute lifetime. So again, thank you so much for being here with us. Let's address the biggest elephant in the room, which is COVID-19. How has the last couple of months been for you and for Microsoft? What have you generally been seeing in the market, and how have companies sort of adapted during this time?
Thank you for that, Sid. I promised my team I'm not going to use the word unprecedented anymore. I still haven't found a better word for it, so I'm going to start with we have gone through an unprecedented time. It is just amazing as to, the pandemic, the challenge, what we faced globally. All of us will say one day we've lived through a pandemic, right? But if I think from our customers' point of view, how this has accelerated the case for digital, our global CEO, Satya Nadella, made a statement and said, we have seen 2 years worth of digital transformation just in 2 months. All companies were literally forced to trust technology to keep their businesses operational. Our customers, and together with our partners, we were at the forefront, making sure that we provide to our customers the services that they required. And when we look at the phases and the way that we kind of like the terminology that we use, there was kind of like the response phase, at least for us, when the president announced towards the end of March that we were going into lockdown level 5. It was almost frightening, right? What does this mean? How are we going to operate? But if I just look at it, it speaks volumes about the resilience of the human spirit. And when time calls for it, right, we show up for the opportunity to make sure that we continue our businesses. And as people, we find an opportunity to collaborate, to work, to keep basically our companies afloat. So it was really about responding, getting operations running, getting teams at home, and making sure that they have the right tech and tools in order for them to continue work. Remember, customers still wanted, even though it was skeleton staff, they still wanted to receive services. And we know in many industries, basically services have fundamentally transformed. And as companies and countries were coming out of the initial lockdown phase, we saw there was a bit of a recovery where people were trying to recover from the economic fallout, trying to make sense of, how do I move to the future, a future which we call, a reimagined future, because we definitely cannot return to a pre-COVID state. If you just look at how we live, we work, we play, it has changed forever. And if you just look at work per se, a lot of companies are now talking about adopting a hybrid workplace model. And I believe that the way that we worked during the lockdown have absolutely proved that it is possible for you to give your employees flexibility, especially if you give them the right technology, where they can collaborate, where you can have the right level of productivity and teamwork in order for you still to meet your business objectives.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that's one of the key things here is that things don't need to go back to the way that they were before. And everybody has become accustomed to this sort of, work from home, work remotely. I have to say, from our perspective, when we went into lockdown, Microsoft was very kind in assisting us in going from an on-premise sort of mail server and that sort of structure to helping us migrate to the cloud, which has been absolutely phenomenal, especially when our teams are working from across the continent and from overseas as well. So, thank you from our side for doing that. So I guess the next question really is, what have you seen? You talked a little bit about your customers and businesses, but what have you seen from a product portfolio from Microsoft point of view that has kind of like really exploded? Has it been in cloud or has it been in sort of other areas? What has been a big driver for you over the last few months?
Oh, for sure. I mean, all our customers used our cloud-enabled technologies, and I could literally go through them one by one. So first of all, with Microsoft Teams, we saw a huge uptake in Microsoft Teams, and we call Microsoft Teams, the hub for teamwork, because it was important that, we were so accustomed to all sitting in a conference room and, talking to each other, seeing each other in the passages, and all of a sudden we had to meet each other now in the digital and virtual passages, and work still had to continue. And I think by and large, people have actually done a fantastic work. I think actually just even in Microsoft, right? We have managed to, keep business, operations, it continued, even though it was still very challenging from a social distancing point of view. Another piece was just, if you look at some of our customers' big operations and some of their big workloads, it had to run on cloud. There is no better way for you to scale, because the beauty of cloud technology and public cloud is that it gives you limitless compute and storage power, and it literally gives you the ability to scale, right? And if you think about a business, you can go from one literally to 100 in no time, because you no longer have to worry about the base infrastructure cost. If we think of traditionally how technology was done, I just mentioned that I've been in technology for 25 years. You literally would think about, I need to buy hardware, service, and and we all how that works. Whereas with cloud, you can literally focus on what innovation can I bring to my customers, what business solutions can I provide, how can I make sure that I provide the right level of services for my business to truly, be at the competitive edge, and also for me to ultimately differentiate myself from my competitors. So this is about customers using cloud-enabled technologies to help them ultimately giving them, keeping their businesses afloat. But also I found that there was a paradigm shift in terms of just the accelerated of what we call this whole digital transformation journeys. We've been working pre-COVID with customers on accelerating, and making the case for digital. Now the conversations we do have with customers is that they absolutely have seen the benefit, right, of absolutely having a digital business, because businesses that were already on a digital journey were absolutely resilient during this period, and they are starting to accelerate that. Businesses who are not are now seriously thinking about what is it that we need to do to make sure that we digitally transform, because I think the resilience of many companies were tested to the core. And now when we kind of look back and you think about your business model, one of the key questions that you need to ask yourself is not just how am I going to reimagine the future, but you need to reimagine a future that absolutely has resilience as a core foundation, and of course using cloud-enabled technology to help you do that.
And cloud is perfect for this, right? Because you turn fixed cost into variable cost, isn't it?
Yes, and I mean, we're always talking about that, and customers always talk about, what is the cost for cloud? It is, of course, I mean, we work on individual cost cases with our customers, but it becomes over time, especially as you go through the journey, it becomes ultimately more cost effective. But also the benefits that customers absolutely love is that it gives you the agility that you absolutely need in order for you to pivot. It makes sure that you stay in the edge of innovation as you bring in more partners, making sure you tailor, specifically to your customers' needs. And also what it does for you, right? Because because we talk about data is now the new oil. It's not just about, lifting and moving your current infrastructure into the cloud. It's about what are you going to do to make sure that you get actionable insights out of your data, because a lot of customers are sitting on data. But how can you harness the data for you to understand what's not happening in your business, but more important, how you could pivot to ultimately provide a better and a more differentiated service for your customers? And what do I mean by that? If you just look post-COVID now, how we all shop. I mean, I used to shop online some of the time. I now shop online all of the time. So as a consumer, I've changed my habits. So it's important that companies use technology, use the data, understand how customers are behaving in the new patterns in order for them now to provide a service that customers ultimately need, because a lot has actually changed.
Absolutely. So, we talked a little bit about the opportunities and cloud being a big one. What are some of the challenges that you've seen in the last few months?
There were a lot of challenges, and we talk at Microsoft a lot about creating inclusive. We need to make sure that as we go forward, digital needs to become inclusive. We need to make sure that we literally touch everyone. And just to perhaps make a very simple example, right? If you think of schools around the world, actually, and I think it gets a little bit more amplified in the continent, for some of those schools who had the technology, they could literally go switch on, learners could get online and you could touch them. But for some schools where they did not have the same level of access to technology, to the same level of tools and equipment, of course, it wasn't as inclusive as it should be. And I think we always talk about the digital divide. And I found that now during this period where we literally had to turn to technology to truly become an enabler, that was a bit amplified. So for me, that was, one of the core challenges that we need to continue to focus on. And for us, we believe at Microsoft, we have a terminology called, democratizing digital and making sure that everyone has the opportunity to ultimately participate in the digital economy. I think also I see it as a challenge equally as an opportunity that we always, say that with 4IR, we have an opportunity to design solutions that are very specific to this continent. If you think about challenges, and we believe that, AI technology will open solutions to some of Africa's most pressing challenges. And I think we have an opportunity as well. If you look at healthcare, just giving people access to healthcare, access to farm agriculture, access to banking. It's a huge opportunity that this has also opened up for us, and even for entrepreneurs to think about, to say, okay, now that everything literally has become a digital economy, what service can I provide for the gaps that now exist in this market to make sure that I ultimately, provide for what customers are ultimately looking for? And I also believe that as much as it's a challenge, we're also in the age, for me, what I would call unconventional partnerships. There is an opportunity for people to partner to provide something that's a little bit more tailored for what customers are looking for right now, but also something that they can do in order for them to almost what I would call to complete or complement a value chain. Because some of the stuff we talk about today, we've never even entertained. For example, when it came out, like, you remember the curbside pickup, that was kind of like a concept that was developed. Now, who would have thought that, right? So it's about some of these unconventional opportunities with these partnerships that now exist that actually open up opportunities, not just for big companies, but also for entrepreneurs as they start thinking about reimagining their own businesses, and even for those who would like to start new businesses.
Fantastic. So I just want to touch a little bit more on a couple of things you said. So we talked a little bit about education. The way that a lot of pundits who've described technology in Africa have described some of these issues is that on one hand, you have the infrastructure problem, so last mile connectivity and bandwidth, but that is being slowly resolved. There are a lot of data centers coming up and connectivity is getting better, costs are going down. On the other side of it, you actually have the education and the skills gap issue. Do you have any comments on how that is evolving, not just in South Africa, but also in Sub-Saharan Africa? And I'm specifically talking about tech skills, coding skills, that sort of thing.
In Microsoft, we do a lot of work around making sure that we give people access to skilling. Skilling is a big conversation for us, and we're doing it across the board, basic literacy, and as well as when it comes to deep technology skills. And if you think about, let me talk first about basic literacy. For example, we've got partnerships ongoing in some of our, we call it townships, where through libraries, we actually make courses available where people could go and upskill themselves to get basic education, on how to use a computer. If you think about the world of work today, the first thing that people do when you enter the workspace, what do? They put you in front of a computer. And the assumption is you actually know what to do. So this is what we're focusing on. But also, if you look at where we're going and some of the new jobs that are starting to emerge, these jobs are now becoming far more technical. We've in fact launched an initiative on the 30th of June this year. We call it the Global Skilling Initiative. And particularly what this will focus on is to giving people access to develop deep technical skills, because if you just think of what has happened during COVID, people have to be very digital in order to participate in this new economy that kind of like evolved very rapidly. So post-pandemic, the jobs are going to be far more, digital. So what we're doing is that we are combining the best of our resources, LinkedIn, we've got GitHub as well, where our developers as well, develop some new code. And of course, Microsoft Learn, where you can go on, you can get very deep technical skills. So we have identified 10 specific learning paths where we believe that where the next jobs are going to. We also have then curated specific courses that people could take that will get them ready for these specific, learning paths. Once they've gone through these courses, they then will have the opportunity at a reduced cost to write exams in order for them to get a qualification. And then the final step will be for us to give them access through our tools and through LinkedIn, for example, on how to access these jobs, right? So we've kind of like thought about it as a continuum to make sure that we give people an opportunity. And I mean, there are all sorts of statistics around as to the number of jobs that will be created as a result of just, digital technologies for IR. And we want to give people an opportunity to reskill, because there's a huge opportunity for us to reskill, and even for some people to upskill themselves in order to participate in this new economy.
Fantastic. Alex, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sid. So before we jump more into the entrepreneurs, and I put on the entrepreneurs hat, I've got two questions. Number one is, how far do you think South Africa, or how far are you away from achieving your goal of democratizing, digital in South Africa versus the rest of the world?
We are on a journey. And what's gratifying about the journey is that it has started. I believe that the fourth industrial revolution, digital technologies, will give us an opportunity to level the playing fields in our continent, in our country. We happy as Microsoft to be deeply grounded in our mission. That is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to do more. We have very specific initiatives, and whether you're talking about basic skills literacy, deep technical skills, whether you're talking about partnerships. We profoundly believe in partnerships and just the level of innovation that we can drive through partnerships. In fact, as Microsoft, we see ourselves as we are a platform company. We're using our partners to come and innovate on our platforms to make sure that we provide our customers with very specific solutions. And we believe that as Microsoft, when we innovate, we grow an entire ecosystem. And this is what we have done, in South Africa and in many places where we do operate. And I think we're going to have to keep at the journey. We're going to have to continue to make the case for change. I also feel that in the last 4 months, we have accelerated their journey, right? It's a very different discussion. When we announced with one of our partners, the connected digital, education platform, which was making the case about the fact that, it's time for us to focus on, providing education on a digital platform so that it can be done more effective in a virtual way. Just the amount of reach that could give you, right? The child you could reach in rural South Africa, giving them a level of education as a same child in, suburban South Africa. Just think of the opportunity that lies within that. So it is a journey. We are big contributors to the journey. We're very determined to continue to make a difference. Yeah, and
are you in the beginning, the middle, or the end?
Honest, Alexandra, if I look at it, for me, this is a continuum, dependent on if I think of where we are right now with COVID, post-COVID, we've accelerated the journey, but I would still think that we are somewhat in the initial stages. And you almost, if you look at our customers are different. Some have accelerated their journey, some are at the beginning of the journey. And so almost you could overlay a very different lens. So I'm almost very careful to make a blanket statement to say we are at the beginning, right? We are at different steps of the journey with some of our customers. There's a profound understanding of the difference that digital transformation could make to their businesses. And we want to make sure that we meet customers where they are and we literally walk with them every step of the way.
How do you make sure that you are actually, leveling the playing field? Because, I mean, there's a lot of debate around whether big tech platforms are leveling the playing field. And I think there is a big opportunity to do that. But how do we make sure that it doesn't increase the gap between, the rich and the poor? Because that's also one of the big criticism. I mean, that's currently a big debate in U.S. Congress, right?
So I believe that as you think about, your own mission, as you think about, just the overall digital transformation journeys, it's about driving purpose-driven digital. Post-COVID, there's a couple of things all of us have to reflect on is how do we take our technical capabilities, we combine that with innovation to ultimately deliver outcomes that will not only be beneficial to our own businesses, but also it would have a societal impact. We can't leave that conversation behind. And it's about the difference we're going to make to our country, the difference we're going to make to our customers, together with our partners, and also ultimately impact our community. So you have to look at this as a complete picture. And what I'm quite gratified—
Stakeholder approach, basically, right?
Exactly. What I'm quite gratified about is that we are a company that's deeply embedded in the basic fabric of our society. We live our mission, and whether it's the difference and the, and the initiatives that we're having in education, in schools, whether it's partnering with our customers to increase technical skills, reskill and upskill people, whether it's the partnerships we build with our ecosystem to say that when we drive innovation, we never do it alone, because we believe that even bringing the data centers, our hyperscale data centers to South Africa, that big investment was made because we saw the opportunity for public cloud in the continent as well as the country. But we also knew that it would give us an opportunity to continue to grow our ecosystem, because we need more partners to innovate with us, to help us deliver services. In fact, we are using a statistic which says that For every $1 that Microsoft gets in Drive, our partners can make $8. It's a statistic that we use because if you look at our business model, typically our services, often in our technology, is deployed, managed, delivered by partners. And this is how we build small companies. In fact, maybe something worth sharing, every year we have something called our annual partner award, whereby we recognize partners who have done exceptionally well, who have built on our strategy. And we then have a special award called the Managing Directors Award, right? Which is seen as the big award of the evening. And for last year, the award went to a smaller company that we incubated, that started with us, and we call it the Emerging Partner Program, because we have taken them on a journey with us. We've started building out that program 2 years ago. We're continuing that because it's all about us empowering smaller companies, because not only innovation, it creates job creation, and you enable an entire ecosystem that ultimately makes a difference to a country and add value.
Inclusive growth is basically the keyword that you're talking about right now, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So you've touched upon a couple of strategies basically that an entrepreneur, a small business owners can use right now to benefit from these abrupt, unprecedented changes that has happened in the past couple of months. And let me just summarize what you said. Basically, you said you need to use data, actionable data. You said that digital needs to be inclusive, so it can't be separate from your strategy, but it needs to be the core of your strategy. And then you said the third thing you said was use unconventional partnership. Now let's say I own a hotel. I don't have a business anymore, basically, or a very reduced business. My revenue dropped by 80%. And now Lillian tells me those three things. And I have one question as that hotel business owner to you is, how? How do I do this? How do I make sure that I can use actionable data? How do I make sure that what sort of structure do I need to make digital inclusive? And how do I go about finding and implementing those unconventional partnerships?
So I would say to you, I think there's a couple of things I would like to add to what you're saying. It's important that, and I'm not going to pretend for 1 minute to have the precise advice. It's about thinking about, first of all, you need to be a digital business, a born in the cloud. We talk a lot about a born in the cloud company, because if you think about the pandemic, a lot of smaller companies faced the challenge was that they were located at a certain place. And when the doors closed, bricks and mortar, people could not find them anymore. How do you make sure that people can find you? Doesn't matter actually where you sit, because if you think of what digital technologies give you, you could sit literally anywhere in the world and still provide a service, right? Because you become accessible. It gives you access, it gives you scale, it makes you incredibly agile. So for me, it's about, did you have a digital platform in order for people to know who you are, where you are, communicate with your customers? Because I believe that, in the next point, as we talk to customers about reimagining their businesses, it's about relevance. How do you create a new profound relevance for your business? And we have seen, and this is a perfect example actually for me, when we stopped doing in-person events, what did everybody think? Oh my word, what's going to happen to the events management companies? And what did they do? They turned to digital events. If I think about my own business, we have literally continued with every single event that we typically would have, because we then pivoted to digital events, right? And this is about doing the deep listening, understanding how your customers are moving. How do you provide that same service in a very different way? And when I talk about unconventional partnerships, it's a question of who can you partner with for you guys to provide a complete service, or also to do something very different dependent on what our customers are looking for. And it's about taking a macro view, but think about your own environment, even your own needs, because we could actually start, if you're an entrepreneur, and I was an entrepreneur for 3 years, start with your own needs. How have your own needs changed, actually? Because some of these things, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's actually sometimes intuitive, right? So it's about that. What can you provide? What's creating frustration for you right now? I've added something here which I thought I would love to tell entrepreneurs, and it's sometimes about being brave, right? And it's about trying new things. And having walked the journey not for a very long time, only 3 years, it can be, very scary and very challenging. And I want to put this though back, Alexandra. It's also about, have intentionality, be very purpose driven. And it's also about the contribution and the difference that I am going to make, right? And to society. And ultimately, what broader value could I add? And if you think of traditional value chains, remember, it was always like we combine an airline with a hotel, and then you kind of have a full package service because they found something. Maybe there's new ways for us to kind of just step back and say, what does these new value chains perhaps look like? And of course, there's no easy or obvious answer, but I think there is an opportunity for us to reimagine what this new world of work, the new world of living, of shopping, socializing, would now mean for us.
So basically, it's about having the core question, or having that core question of where do people find me, be super digital, and then also have that star north, that purpose in front of you, to not lose track in all these new opportunities, basically.
Yes. And there's something else that I would like to talk about, which is, as I talk about these new technologies, and something else you asked me, Sid, about what are some of the core challenges. One of the key things we talk to customers about is also security. Security has become a big discussion. All of us are now working from home, and we give customers a lot of tools and insights, resources in terms of how do you make sure you ultimately safeguard yourself from, cybersecurity, threats, and making sure that also when you think about just security overall, you're looking at multi-factor authentication. We have this, zero trust policy that talks about, you first verify rather than just trust. So there's a big security conversation, especially if you look at South Africa in particular. For us, that's a real challenge right now. And one of the key, things that I do talk to customers about is making sure that you secure your environment, secure your endpoints, because there's so many different ways now that could pose a challenge for you. And if you're a smaller business, it doesn't mean that you would have less of a challenge, right? But perhaps that you could outsource that to someone else with the right level of expertise that could actually help you take care of that, particular, initiative, so to speak, within your environment. And I think there's perhaps another point as well, Alexandra, as you think of it, it's talent. You're going to have to surround yourself with the right people. Talent has profoundly changed because there's a lot of talk around the gig economy. You can now also start a business. Don't limit yourself to the 5 people you may know in your neighboring city, but who else could you bring onto your team? Because now that this is remote everything. Now you can actually bring in quite a global team, right? With people working remotely, and you could actually also kind of like look at talent in a very different way and build quite a phenomenal team.
That's actually an interesting way, because that's exactly what we've been doing now. So just to share some experience that we've done, is we are currently saying we don't want to increase the risk of now adding for each position that we actually want to hire a full-time headcount. But what we want to do is we want to fill super specialized position, whether this is now Google or Bing AdWords, or whether this is, some landing page optimization, or whether this is some VBA Excel, Microsoft VBA Excel skills, whatever it is, that we find specific people that work part-time from us wherever they are in the world. And that's a new strategy that we've been also going into, because it's A, you find the right people for the right job, and B, it's a variable cost. And it makes you more resilient in these unprecedented or difficult times.
Absolutely. And when I talk, for example, we work with a lot of independent software vendors, right? And they come up with a specific piece of intellectual property. And the biggest challenge that they typically do have is, how do I let people know, first of all, what I have, and how do I get to it on a central marketplace where I could make my product accessible? And also, if you think about entrepreneurs, is one of the things, back to the point about building a digital business, is about how do you make your product accessible, not just to the people in your neighboring community, but actually to anyone globally who has an appetite and a need for what you provide.
I think that's one of the important things about digital transformation and just digital in general, is that it allows you to access the global market, and now is for what we're talking about right now, also a global talent pool. I'm a bit cognizant of time that we have, so just a few more questions. I'm glad you brought up cybersecurity. We actually had a conference on the future of work a couple of months ago, and one of the panels was on cybersecurity, and we've been spending a lot of time talking about this and zero trust environments and things like that. But at the end of the day, the greatest chink in any company's armor is its people, and that's the first point of failure with social engineering, where people just volunteer their information away. It's not even a complicated hack of sorts, but it's just not having a secure password or falling for a phishing scam. So how do we address that part of the chain? How do we make our people smarter and less susceptible to fraud and scams and phishing and that sort of thing?
I think for me, it's a two-way thing. Of course, there's a lot that, if you're a big company, there's a lot that your IT or administrating your IT department would do to make sure that you protect it. And I think if you're a small company, you could do this yourself, or you could even outsource it. And I think a big part for me is training, making sure that people understand and get trained, and almost like, when you get a phishing email, how do you differentiate that? How do you test for that? If you kind of know how to identify it, it's sometimes not easy, but it's easier to kind of detect it. So I think for me, training is absolutely a big part of that. I talked about multi-factor authentication. If I just think about my own devices, and I use a lot now my fingerprints on many places, it's good to do that. It's good because sometimes I don't know whether it's happened to you that you logged into an account and you see somebody is trying to log in, and you think, but I'm not busy with this app right now. And just the mobility and the proliferation of apps have created its own problems. So it's important that you have a multi-factor authentication, something that's very basic that everyone knows, and sometimes we don't do enough, is the strength of your password. Often people use the most obvious things, right? People we know and so on, and people don't understand that the length and using special characters, etc., it kind of make it difficult. And in fact, there is a diagram out basically that basically shows that if you have a 4-letter password versus a 17-letter with special characters and numbers in it, how long it would take hackers to basically access and some of those things. And it's about just making sure that you equipped yourself with the right knowledge, because I think it's a two-way thing. It's making sure that, of course, strong firewalls, it can be detected, making sure you have the right technology. We're spending a lot of time talking to our customers about investing in security with the right governance, compliance, making sure that you can detect, cybersecurity threats. But some of the other things on a personal level, I think that's also stuff that people can do to make sure that they are equipped and ultimately, educate for themselves.
Wow, great. Thank you so much, Lillian. Now, we just want to close off with a personal question at the end. It's like, how has it been for you in these unprecedented, difficult, changing times as a, business leader with so much responsibility for the company, for your people, for society as a whole? And what are your main personal learnings that you've gained in these times?
So I think it's a challenging time, and it was a challenging time for everyone. For us and for me as a leader, my key focus and together with my leadership team was safety and the health and safety of our employees. We've ultimately prioritized that. Also, there was a need for a deeper human connection now that we were socially distant. So one of the things that we did do was checking in regularly with the team, because working from home also came with its own dynamics. And we wanted to make sure that, first of all, people understood you care about their well-being. And secondly, also, care about what it would take in order to make sure that, you give them the necessary tools and comfort in order for them still to be as productive as possible working from home, taking into consideration, in fact, this is what I said to my teams, that remember when we decided to work from home, we kind of made our families uncomfortable, right? So we need to be mindful of that. One thing that inspired me profoundly was just the resilience of the human spirit, whether it was just how businesses across private and public sector could pack up almost in no time and find a way to still continue to do the work despite the difficult circumstances. And it's just spoken for me directly to the resilience of, people, just show how strong we are, not just South Africa as a nation, because this happened globally, but just in terms of how everybody literally just, pulled through. And for me, that was inspiring to see, because sometimes you don't understand how strong you are until you get tested to your core. And we have to admit that people were tested. And that is why, even as leaders, we need to continue to lead with a lot of empathy and understanding, because I believe even cultures in companies, need to adapt to the fact that you need to almost pay attention to the individual needs of your employees, and as leaders, how we need to continue to do deep listening just to understand how things have changed. Also, how adaptable people are. We all had to adapt, and we now doing it. Not saying it's easy, but we've changed, and perhaps we will look back a year from now and probably absorb how profound the change was. And I think for me, that is inspiring as well. So the question is, what are we going to do with some of the positive gains that we now have post-COVID? And you all saw the statement, and I loved it when it said that, when we return back to normal, you can't return with everything that you had before, right? It has to be a new normal where we do new things to make sure that, we continue to progress and we continue to create a much better society as a whole.
Fantastic. These are very encouraging words. That was Lillian Barnard, the Managing Director of Microsoft South Africa. Thank you so much for your time. We really enjoyed that conversation, and hopefully we will see you very soon.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Lillian, for ending on such a positive, encouraging note for society and entrepreneurs in general.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.